this result will change at least something in terms of internal policy, but also in terms of American foreign policy. And we have to look in which way we can cope as Europeans for the next 2 years.
I think if it had been a blue tsunami, I think you could have seen more Republican senators defect. And so they're going to be potentially faced with the question, do you stand with the president or do you defect?
I think had some of those more progressive candidates won in the more conservative states, it would have been a clearer mandate that Democrats ought to choose a quite progressive nominee moving forward, that energizing their base is the way to go. But I'm unsure that that's the lesson that's taken away. I think this is still an unresolved question that Democrats will have to hash out during their primary process.
At the same time, we should be cautious, and I think we shouldn't imagine that after Trump's gone, if he should be defeated, not in 2020, that we can simply revert to the status quo. Because Trump is a product of that status quo.
We heard a lot about politics getting uglier, about an ossification of the battle lines, about confrontation. Are there any similarities to be drawn from what's happening in the States with the political dynamics here in Europe?
There are two important differences, namely that we in Europe still believe that history is moving forward. And a lot of what we do is attuned to that understanding of the world. We think we can make the world a better place.
Our political parties are struggling with, and I would say all of them, developing a narrative where they can convey some sense or some narrative where they can credibly make citizens and voters believe that they can protect.
Continue the conversation that we started earlier this morning with maybe a bit more emphasis on what is to be done, or what can be done.
And probably the lesson from the midterms is that it still remains very unclear, that the changes that we've been seeing for a very long time, even prior to this administration, are certainly significant and likely to be long-lasting, not least on the pushback on trade. But that the midterm elections didn't give us a very strong sense of where things are heading, because they did reflect that America remains tremendously divided. It wasn't an election that was dominated by foreign policy concerns. It was dominated by a concern with healthcare, with cultural issues, with the Supreme Court, with immigration, and bolstered by a very robust economy. Nonetheless, I think that you can probably read a lot into these elections about the divisiveness across the American public in terms of America's broader role in the world, even though the polling doesn't suggest that this is what the elections were about.
When Trump first started going after NATO, and it stayed consistent throughout his presidency, which again is indicative that the American people are not necessarily on board with some of the rhetoric and policies you've seen coming out of the White House as regards a transatlantic relationship, which again suggests to me that there's an appetite for a different kind of leadership among Americans when it comes to the transatlantic relations, particularly on security issues.
I think the United States and the EU sign a treaty which allows for the exchange of electronic evidence cross-border. Second point, very quickly, cooperation on humanitarian assistance and foreign aid. And the third on my list, Ian, would be security cooperation.
Despite of the change, let's say, in the approach to transatlantic relations we've been witnessing these years, at staff level and under the radar, there's been a lot of good cooperation going on, not only in justice and home affairs and in law enforcement, but also in foreign policy.